Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank you for and Senator Reid for calling this important hearing. I think it's an important discussion. I do have a suggestion, however. I'm, as you may know, a member of the Intelligence Committee, and for 7 years we've been having hearings in the Intelligence Committee on Afghanistan and hearings here, and there were times when I weren't sure we were talking about the same country. So I think it would be very helpful if this committee wants to take an active role, that we have a classified hearing with the intelligence community about what their perceptions are in Afghanistan, what the chances are, what would happen if we left, if we stayed. I just think that would give us a more fulsome picture, because as I say, they have over the years had a very different view than the witnesses that we've had at this committee.
Which one's better?
I would say that the CIA is running slightly ahead right now.
Okay.
In terms of their assessment. That's all I can tell you, Mr. Chairman. But I just think it's important. If we're going to tackle this subject, we ought to have the most complete picture that we can. And these witnesses have added a great deal to our understanding today. Let me talk about the haven for terrorism argument, because that's really the fundamental justification. Is that a realistic justification now? Because there are other places that can be havens: Yemen, Libya, Somalia, Mali, Sudan. Is it sort of geopolitical whack-a-mole? We're going to focus in one place and our adversaries are going to rise up somewhere else. Dr. Jackson? Do you see what I'm saying?
I mean, absolutely.
The haven for terrorism argument is sort of reminds me of the domino theory of the 70s or the 60s as a kind of all-purpose justification.
Absolutely. I think it's an infinitely expansible argument, and you're right to ask what makes Afghanistan different. I think at least 3 different things make this particularly difficult and important to us. One is sort of geography. This turns out to be a sanctuary that's hard for us to get at if we're not actually physically located there. This is a war being waged in a landlocked country surrounded either by enemies or frenemies. This is an incredibly hard place to wage a war if you're not there. So the consequences of leaving there, leaving our counterterrorism footprint, and trying to exert influence from outside is much, much, much more difficult.
So it would really become a haven,
yes,
because of
absolutely.
its geography and location.
And we've run this experiment before in the 90s. In other words, the Clinton administration got very worried about—
But we're doing counterterrorism in other countries without a military presence.
Absolutely.
Would that be possible in Afghanistan?
Not in the same way. In other words, it's much more, it's much easier for us geographically and politically to operate in a place like Yemen from offshore than it is for us to operate offshore into Afghanistan. It has to do with distances, it has to do with agreements with neighboring countries, that type of thing. Second thing I would point out is sponsors. This neighborhood is full of people fueling extremist behavior or backing various horses in this race. Iran is a consistent backer of various, not just Shia, but Sunni groups. Pakistan has had a finger in multiple different proxy groups.
I'm going to ask you to accelerate because I've got a digital timer going down.
I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
My addition to that is we are interested in Yemen, Libya, and Somalia and Kenya, and we operate offshore to do that. We don't have a physical presence in the country. We use direct action forces to do that. And as I explained earlier, the reason is all 3 have aspirations to attack the United States or our European allies. In Central and South Asia, much more challenging, to be sure, for the reasons we just discussed. And I think a physical presence is essential. Half of the world's terrorist organizations are in that region, in Pakistan and in Afghanistan in particular.
Well, we've maintained a troop presence in Japan, South Korea, Germany, other parts of Europe for 70 years.
Right.
Is this a case, would you make to the American people, that this is a place where we need an indefinite presence, not at a terribly high level, but at a level that will enable us to keep, as I think you used the term,
totally
keep
agree.
our foot on the throat of the terrorists?
I totally agree with that assessment. I think it's a political apple that leaders are not willing to swallow and talk to the American people honestly about. This is a multi-generational problem that we've got. We are being selective about which radical Islamist groups are threatening the American people, and you can make a case that we could possibly have to have a counterterrorism force someplace in Central South Asia, best place is Afghanistan, as long as that threat is there indefinitely.
And it will require a military presence to support the counterterrorism function, is that
Yes.
what you're saying?
And I think we will eventually, frankly, get down below 8,600 at some point, and we'll narrow that down to intelligence, counterterrorism, and air power that's outside the country to be able to support our activities. But it could possibly lead to an indefinite commitment of a small number of forces in that country, much like we have less than 1,000 now trying to keep our foot on ISIS, keep our foot on their throat in Syria to make sure that they
but
don't reemerge.
I think you'd agree, and I'm out of time, but I think you'd agree that if that's going to be the case, somebody's got to tell the American people that.
I totally agree with that, Senator. Totally agree with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.